tell me, where in the NESC are the requirements for grounding of guys, and any information on that?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. So this is a question we've gotten a few times here recently. Let's go ahead and take a look. I don't show a lot of code text or wording in our presentations normally, but I wanted to kind of show a little bit about how the code works here. So just like with any legal standards, state law, other standards, a lot of times the heading of the rule we're in here, guys, looks pretty good, but we want to make sure we're in the right part. So we kind of go back up a page or two, see where we're at. We're in C, which is grounding for non-current carrying parts. And that's in rule 215, which is grounding and bonding. So kind of tells us we're in the right place. Just make sure we're where we think we are. The other thing I just want to point out up on the top right there, all of our presentations, when I do the code training, I put the part, section, and rule up there. So if people have their handouts later from the full class, they can go back, use those as reference. So we're in rule 215C2 up in the corner there. It says the anchor guys shall be effectively grounded as specified in Rule 092C2, with an exception that they're not required to be grounded if they're insulated. So in the intent in the code 015, it tells us exceptions are part of the code. They're just as valid as the rule they apply to. So what we see here is essentially guys have to either be grounded or insulated, and that's where this requirement comes from, is this rule. The other thing we talk a lot about in our full day classes is just how to find things in the code. So parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, part 2 that we're in here covers overhead lines, and then rule 09C2 or 2C2, that's in section 9, which covers grounding requirements. So part 2 will tell us when to ground, and section 09 will tell us how to ground. Just a kind of a drawing of that, an example there. On the left, we've got the grounded guy. It's attached to both the neutral and the guy coming down to the pole ground. Section 09 that tells us about grounding again, how to ground. The guy can be connected either to the pole ground or to an effectively grounded messenger or neutral. So 092C and 096C talk about what that means. If they're grounded at least 4 times per mile, they're effectively grounded. So we can connect either to the pole ground or to that for the grounding. On the right there is a guy strain insulator. You might see a Johnny ball sometimes. So if you look at the rural utilities, they started in the late 30s, didn't have a lot of engineering and staff. So the REA and now the RUS came up with some standards for them. So if you out looking at the rural utilities, typically they'll have the grounded guys. If you have the investor-owned utilities, more commonly we'll use the insulated guys, but there's kind of a mix out there depending on where you're at. So one other part of that exception we saw was that if something happens to the guy, it breaks, swings down, has to be at least 8 feet above ground at any energized portion of the guy. So I've seen some accidents where those guys came into contact with jumpers or maybe a transformer on the pole on the high side of the transformer. Have to make sure that we position that so it's at least 8 feet above ground. Gets a little more complicated when you've got maybe transmission, distribution, underbuild, communications attachments. They all have guys. We need to make sure those kind of line up. So if one sags down, it's not transferring that energized voltage down to ground where somebody could come into contact with it. Have a couple examples here. First one, so this is on a rural utility, electric cooperative. Up at the top, you can see they've got a light angle. They've got a bisector guy that's grounded. And then down at the bottom, there's 3 communication attachments. You can see one of those, the bottom one, has a Johnny ball, an insulator in it. So it's an insulated one. The code doesn't say we have to do all the same on the pole. If you have joint use agreements that you're looking at, we talk a lot about those in our joint use class. There are often requirements above and beyond the code with your joint use agreement. So they may say that you have to use bonding or insulating to match the utility that you're attached to. But it's common to see, investor-owned utility that's got insulated guys, and then the communication attachments below may all have grounded guys. So you can mix those up.
Yep.
kind of just a last little zoom in on those two there. You can see the ground, the bond over to the ground for the guy at the top there. That's the rural utility, the electric, the power ground. And then down on the communication side, the top looks like cable TV has a bond going around there from the messenger on the top. The middle one goes behind the pole, so it's a little harder to see. And then the bottom one is, again, insulated there.
Very good, Grant. And
Uh,
I see we got a number of questions. Or go ahead, Grant. I see you got one more slide there.
I
Keep going.
I
Yep.
just had one more example
Yep.
where span guy, they've got insulators at both sides so that if something happens and it flips around, hopefully we're following that 8 foot above ground rule.